life-wise, knocked the absolute crap out of me. No energy now. Struggling a bit. But it's not all bad news because I read a lot of books. So we'll have a 3-star, 2 3.5 stars, 2 4 stars, 2 4.5 stars, and a 5-star. Great stuff to get stuck into. And we'll start with the 3-star. Now, I'll preface this by saying, you know, a lot of us read very big books. And we need those palate cleansers to go in the middle. But they tend to be series that are palate cleansers that we want to get into. And, well, one of the very common series that people talk about is Discworld. And I thought I would try Discworld to see if it would be a nice respite from some of the heaviness that comes from that. Except I've tried Discworld before. I'm pretty sure I don't have the book anymore because it's made its way back to a charity shop or a relative or something over the years, but it was Witch's Brew. And I read it, and, you know, Discworld for me is kind of, it's fine. Do I find it funny? Tittersome? If, you know, a word. I don't find it roariously funny, or certainly didn't at that time, so I thought I'd start back. And I start back with Colour and Magic. As you can see here, these lovely hardback books now. For no other reason, you could just read these books and buy these books just to have them. I love the bit of foiling and stuff that's on them, on the side, and they're just lovely, lovely books. But Colour and Magic, a lot of people say not to start here, but, you know, I'm one of those people. Show me the world and I'll get involved in the characters later. See me the good stuff later. I don't want to be starting on the best stuff now. I want to see if the writing style and humour and stuff connects. And things, if anybody's read Discworld before, that I was a bit, you know, either didn't remember from reading before, otherwise there's no chapters. It's not really a problem. They've got this lovely bookmark in here, so I'll never really lose track of page. But there are kind of like paragraph breaks or section breaks in it, so it's not all bad in that regard. So I made my way through it. Now, you already know this is going to be my lowest kind of rating book that there is. But it's not to say that I'll not continue reading Discworld, because, you know, while I find this tittersome, it's also not very long. Like, this one's about, 240 pages, something like that. It was a quick read. I didn't expect it to be short stories, you know, within the world with the same characters. Rincewind and Flower and all of those characters that are in there that are talked about here. I don't think any of them are particularly fantastic. In fact, I actually know, having read this book, what I don't like about some of Discworld before and why I hadn't been able to connect beforehand. I don't like dumb characters or characters that are main characters of a book that are played to be off as fools, as Rincewind kind of is in this. He's kind of seen as an idiot. That's something I really don't gel with. Having said that, he has progression throughout this book. He has a bit of story that connects and moves forward and does all of those things. And by the end of it, it was kind of like, right, okay, I could read some more of this. So, read some more of it, I will do. But this one was a 3-star. The story's somewhat interesting. The characters are somewhat interesting. The humour's still very so-so for me. Although, I think it did laugh out loud in one place, which I suppose is massive move forward from where it was beforehand. So, Colour of Magic, 3 stars. Next one I've got up is, well, it's a Stephen King book. I'd done a review of Doom Key last month, and I do like these new paperbacks that are coming out, the new Rainbow paperbacks that are coming out, and I thought I'd pick up one that I hadn't read beforehand, and I picked up The Shining. Now, The Shining's a very famed book. It's also a very famed film. I actually have filmed a comparison of book to screen that will go up relatively soon. As far as a Stephen King book goes, I'm not a massive fan of The Shining. Now, it's brilliantly written, really enjoyable, but its tone is a bit grim for me the whole way through. Like, it's a bit too much. It's a bit on the nose the whole way through, and there's no real respite from it, and because of that, it's a very heavy set kind of dour bit, and obviously it gets exciting in places. It becomes much more thriller-like as you go through, but for a lot of parts of it, it's just heavy and sags because of how grim and dark it is. And, you know, obviously, if you're turning up to read a horror book, that's what you're expecting, but kind of all the way through was a bit much. Some of the foreshadowing was a bit too much on the nose, and it took away from the enjoyment of the book. Now, contrast that with watching the film they've done. You put the two things together, they make for an amazing experience together. So if you're a fan of the film and you want to read the book, God, it's a really great companion. You'll get so much more out of the story in general by putting the two of them together. But as a book by itself, I've read better from King. and maybe not surprising, it's earlier on in his oeuvre, or in his storytelling. So, whilst a lot of people might love The Shining, I thought it was just good and was a 3.5-star read. Next up is an indie book. So I first seen this one, came up on one of the Discord servers, and Dominic's Books had made a post. I think he'd received the 2 books that have been released in the series in the post, and said, God, this is an interesting concept. And it's an author called Brian Eicher, and he has released 2 books. One is The Assassins of Malcoze, which I have here, which I say is not an enormously big book, but he's also got The Treasure of Laura, of which, spoiler, I subsequently picked up. And the idea is that he has within the same world continents that are in different stages or different ideological outlooks. So one's a fantasy outlook and one is a sci-fi outlook, which is kind of neat, I think, within the same world. I mean, it's very loosely pitched to me like that. When it goes in, I'd be interested to see what the contrast or what connectedness there is between the two worlds, in terms of, you know, is it just like a Cosmere thing that there's slight references, or is there something that's going to play a bit more further down the line? But this is very much in the style of a fantasy. So, you know, there's fights, there's swordplay, that kind of stuff in it, and some magic. Now, this is, like I say, a short book, and actually, if all of the things that I'll say are downsides about Assassins of Malcoze are the fact that I wanted, just come back to the fact that I wanted more. And I thought this would be perfect because it's a short read, I could fit it in, and certainly it did. It was perfect for that idea. Some place art, you get some character art, etc. like there. And goes along with the story. Now, the story is like a lot of interconnected stories. You have a king who may have a legitimate or illegitimate heir. People are going to go search for him. You have a king's daughter that's querying her life and future. Does she want to follow her own hobbies, her own dreams, or is she tied to, you know, servitude and actually being a successor for the king? We have a talented young fighter who discovers that he can use magic with some of his fighting techniques, and in a way that people haven't done for many, many years. There is a plot to kill the king. There's a lot of things going on together here, and, you know, with that, and in such a short book, it kind of feels a bit squeezed for time, and I would like to have seen it spread out a little bit. It's amazing how it all comes together, I have to say. It's amazing that he manages to pull them all together and that it all meets in the end and comes to a satisfying conclusion in what is a lot of very well written and enthralling kind of text. You know, the action scenes are very well written. You know, they grab you and pull you along, but it did feel a bit like, God, I'm switching between viewpoints, and Christ, I'm halfway through the book here. I don't really feel like I've had enough time with everybody. I don't really have a sense of who they are. Maybe aside from the king's daughter. She's the one that seems to be the most fully fleshed out, the one that I understood the best, and you really do get a sense of her quandary and what she's going to do, and when she twists and turns all of her options. You get a good sense of her, and fewer of the other perspectives feel as nicely taught. Another 100 pages in this book would have made it really great, which is why I rated it 3.5 stars. I think there's an awful lot more to come here. It's a series that I'm invested in. It's the series that I'm going to continue on with, and one that I greatly appreciate. And while I hate going on and rating these things on Goodreads, etc., because you've got an author that's obviously starting out, it's first book. It's incredible for a first book. I've got to rate it to a point where I feel where it is. It has an awful lot more to go. It has an awful lot more to give, and it's something that I'm very much looking forward to seeing more of. And hopefully in the next few months, I'll be able to read The Treasure of Laura, and repeat back to you exactly what I thought there of it. Which takes me to my first of my 4-star reads. First of all, I'll touch on very quickly because of a full review on the channel, and that was Tigana by Gabrielle K. Now, I did this as a buddy read on Sarah Reid's channel. It was great fun to do as a buddy read. As people know, buddy reads are just incredible. But I have a full review up now. I ended up giving it 4 stars. I think in general, my conclusion is that may be a bit harsh because it's certainly one of the best written books I've ever read. But it's also one that has a couple of problems, mainly in the middle. It has a couple of problems with getting belaboured with characters, and maybe, you know, again, this is another one that's a single standalone fantasy that could have done with being spread over multiple books, as this one's about, people who have lost their identity and want to regain their identity. It is a world with two tyrants that have control over the land with magic, and people want to get revenge and overthrow the tyrants. I mean, at a very broad level, that's what it's about. It's a very storied and famous fantasy book, and one that a lot of people love. So you're not going to come to me and for me to tell you, God, it's a good book. It's a great book. It just, again, fell short of where I think it could have been. I do fully concede that if I reread it, I might revel even more in those bits where it felt like it sagged or that people struggle to get through. Like, I know an awful lot of people. It's quite famously one that Alan took 6 months to finish. There's a couple of people still doing the reads in the moment, and I get it. It's this bit in the middle, or a couple of, about a third or halfway through, that it really does sag in terms of impetus and pacing. And once you get through that part, you've got to get through to the end, and you'll really enjoy the book. But that's Tigana, and one that I thoroughly enjoyed and thoroughly recommend. It's a 4-star read. My other 4-star read, well, again, this feels a bit harsh. It's The Bone Ships by R.J. Barker. Now, this is a book for about 20 chapters that does precious little but build its world. It's a world where, I only know this because I've seen other people talk about it, there's no trees, but ships are then made of the resource called of dragon bones, basically. But the problem is, dragons, certainly, and sea dragons have not been around for a very long time. It seems like a spent resource, and so power over the seas and power over the world is basically controlled by those that have the big ships at the moment, and there's no prospect of making bigger ships. And we are thrust into a world where there is a black ship, or ship of death, or convicted ship, that is in the hands of a young man called John Twiner, and it gets taken off him at the start of the start of the book by a female shipwife, or captain, if you like, called Lucky Meascalbryn. And she is an amazing character. She's strong, she's tough, but she's fiercely loyal. And what she is somebody that's very devoted to inspiring people, to making people the best of who they are themselves. And I think if nothing else in the book, that character and that desire of showing these people who they could be, it's incredibly compelling to read, and it's something that you'll really want to keep on turning the page of, because I think Lucky Meascalbryn is an absolutely fabulous female character. John Twiner is somebody who you'll initially hate, but as he grows as a person and becomes less of a bloody dweeb, you'll really get a hold of him. And like I said, you get an allusion to it there with the word shipwife, meaning captain. A lot of the nautical terms that normally trip me up when I'm reading like nautical fantasy or things like that are just gone. There's the reason that 20 chapters of this roughly is devoted to building the world and the experience that you have, because they basically rewrite all of that language. It isn't there. And after a while you will certainly get in the habit of it. And what you're left with for the rest of the book is something that's just really compelling. I mean, you're in the world then. You have these great characters. You have not spoil the story too much, the Arachesian dragons haven't been seen for a while. There's sight of one, and obviously in the idea, if somebody gets a hold of this dragon and kills it, then they'll have new fresh bones and they can build bigger ships and they can basically get control over the world. So it's a very sought after resource. It's a thrilling thing. I actually think this is a book that would... I've only read one book of it, and there's obviously a trilogy there, which I've picked up and will certainly be added to the TBR pile. Make great for an adaptation on HBO or something. I think the character work that's in here is terrific. The one thing that I'll warn against, because I did start this as an audiobook, and I think the audiobook is delivered magnificently in the end, but because there's so much new language in it, I kind of struggled for conceptually what those words looked like, felt like, or sounded like, so that I could recognise them again. So I kind of had to do a bit of an immersive read, which I've never really done before, but really worked. Started off with the audio, and I could kind of flip between the two of them afterwards. Once I was in the world, I really enjoyed the narration. I really enjoyed the delivery of it, even if... I'm confused. Meascalbryn especially, I think her accent changes throughout the audiobook. If anybody else has done the audiobook, let me know if that's something that you notice as well. Seem to have a different voice every now and again, but there's a lot of characters, and I thoroughly enjoyed, and I cannot wait to read more of this. 4 stars for Bone Ships. Utterly terrific. Which brings me to my 4.5 star reads. I'll start with the Paper Menagerie, which was recommended at the end of the year, I think, by Bookborn as a short story collection. And I'm not somebody that reads a lot of short stories, so I didn't really know what to expect of this, other than I thought it'd be nice to mix in a couple of short stories at the start of the day, or kind of get into those days where I'm going to set aside a bit of time today to do a bit of reading, and I'm going to start with a short story or something to kind of get me into the creative flow or the reading groove. And oh man, you can tell by its position in this video what I thought of Paper Menagerie. It's bloody fantastic. It is just a series of some short, some bit longer stories that are basically just ideas, as kind of what I expected short stories to be, but I didn't expect the ideas to fire so often in my head with what was going. And there's such a mix of genres. There's some really hard sci-fi in here. There's some, social studies. There's crime. And then there are these very pensive and very thought-provoking, nearly emotional dramas based around war and history, and they are very effective. Now, I didn't cry at this. Like, I know an awful lot of people cry, and I kind of did expect. I'm not an emotional wreck or a stone husk or anything that'll not cry. I didn't, but I can see exactly why people would, because there are certainly stories that are deeply effective in communicating emotion and sadness and all of the things, and longing and so many emotions within one book is the thing that I'll point out. There's so much good storytelling, and it really has piqued me interest in so far as Ken Liu's own novelization writing. I've got Grace of Kings then afterwards, and I know lots of people have been raving about Grace of Kings. If the quality of writing is anything like this, God, I can't wait. It's going to be fantastic. 2 books to go, and we're on to another buddy read, and this one was from Alan's channel, and it was the Flintlock Fantasy Book 1 of 5 by Django Wexler of 1,000 Names. Now, man, I'm going to tell you right now, see these covers, these UK covers, these Del Rey covers? I love them. Holy smokes. I love the art on the front. It's very arresting, and it actually hides what is it's a pretty chunky read, this one. It's 500, just over 500 pages, but the text is reasonably small in it. This was a heavy read, but a really enjoyable read, but one that I really didn't struggle with, aside from one little bit. And that is, I've never really read Flintlock Fantasy beforehand, and while I enjoyed a lot of the early military stuff, I started to feel like, God, I need something else apart from this military stuff, because once I get to the 4th or 5th military battle, I was like, yeah, I couldn't do a whole 512 pages of this, never mind doing 5 books of this. It needed that bit of magic or that bit of fantasy element in it, and it does come, even if it comes kind of the last 100 pages all in one go at the end to set up the next book. There's enough mysticism and there's enough intrigue that's created in there. You kind of have this idea of lots of characters in here. There's a couple of main ones that we follow in Marcus and Winter, the 2 main perspectives that we follow, and both are really interesting. Marcus being the captain of the second in command of the entire unit in this world where they're basically trying to fight off the indigenous people, who are basically religious fanatics for the most part, but they seem to be protecting something, and you're made to guess, well, what is the thing they're protecting? And then you have Winter, who's a lowly soldier in the group, that is quickly promoted. She's hiding a secret, and that is that she's female. But she's also very capable. So you get to see the growth of both these characters, the fight of them. So Marcus is, held back or constricted by his sense of duty and loyalty to the men that have been serving with him and they've grown up with. And Winter's just heart scared of being found out. She found out because she's female, but because she's been promoted and she feels she's been promoted too quickly. I think the 1,000 Names was brilliant. I thought for most of the way through it was a 4-star rate, a pretty solid, kind of in the lower, like the 3.7 side of 3.8 side of 4 stars. But by the end of the book, it was definitely a 4.5 star reading, a pretty solid 4.5 star. I thought the 1,000 Names was great. Thanks so much, Alan, for suggesting it, because I never would have picked it up. And what I'm really surprised by these are, because I've got the next couple in hardback there, they are they're relatively cheap to find, these hardbacks. There's a lot of ex-library copies, and the one that I got for the 3rd book was a bit battered, but by the time I took the plastic cover off and kind of smoothed it out a bit, it's a pretty good looking copy. So let's hope I can get the last 2 in as good nick, and see if I can keep on doing this series, because it's a lot of fun and seems to be really going places. And the 2nd book, The Shadow Throne, is supposed to be quite political, and if there's one side of fantasy that I really, really, really love, is political. Parts in fantasy. Or flintlock fantasy, as it case may be. Which leaves me with my 5-star read. And it's a second book in a series. I've done a whole load of book 1s, and I feel like I've done no book 2s, and I'm going to do a couple of book 2s in this. I'll not spoil it at all. It's Well of Ascension, book 2 of Mistborn 1 by Brandon Sanderson. A bit chunkier. Man, I don't care what size Brandon Sanderson's books are. They're such quick reads. They're really easy reads, and they're really compelling. I bloody loved Well of Ascension. It's pretty different from Final Empire or Mistborn, depending on where you're reading it from. In that, first book, Final Empire, they're the plucky people fighting, and in the second one, they're not so plucky anymore, and they're in a very different place. And I think the tone of the book is incredibly different. The timbre of who they are as people and what they're trying to do is very different. So I'm not doing any spoilers from Final Empire to 2, but I think that tone is different enough that people kind of bounce off. You've still got the slew of really popular characters in there, and every time they interact with each other, oh god, it's great. I think the character of Sazed comes really to the fore in this second book, and you really get a sense of who he is in a person, his values, and also how his whole race, the Keepers, evolved, and who he is within them, etc. And you have a couple of new characters that are brought in there, but it's the political intrigue and the manoeuvring and all of that kind of stuff that I just love. I've just said it about the Shadow Campaign series. I love political manoeuvring within fantasy. It's some of my favourite bit, and because of that, I think I probably like this book better than the Final Empire. I know it's not a commonly held thought, but this is just, one was a 5-star read, this is the second one's a 5-star read. I'm going to read Hero of Ages. I'll be shocked if within this world I don't think that's a 5-star read, but that remains to be seen. But yeah, Well of Ascension, bloody great. I really, really enjoy Mistborn. There's no doubt about it. The character of Vin, the character of Elend, Doxson, Sazed, they're all fantastic. And yeah, well worth getting through. And that's my, apologies, rather lengthy reading month. I have a couple of things that I'm reading. I'm nearly finished at the moment, so I did probably more reading than I thought. This month coming up will probably be a bit less, but you'll see that in my TBR video that I've got coming up. And I look forward to speaking to you soon. If you've seen any of the books, let me know what you thought of them. Am I way off piste with a lot of them, or did you have similar experiences than I did? If you have anything to suggest that is like any of these, please let me know as well. I'll speak to you again soon. Take care. All the best. Bye.